And he's also a publisher. He had a book publisher. You've been doing that for 36 years. And he publishes things like The Secret, The Hidden Messages in Water, What the Bleep Do We Know, and a bunch of other books that he's probably going to talk about. And it turns out that he's on the board of IONS. So I asked him to talk about what's happening at IONS and what are the plans for the future, which they talked about at the conference, but I didn't get to go to that session. And also to talk about what he's been noticing as a publisher, what kind of trends he's been noticing as far as what's happening out there. You know, I think if consciousness is shifting, we should be able to see it in what's being published, what's being talked about, what's happening, what kind of healing's being done, and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we have Richard, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you, Dottie, very much. And as I said, I'm very honored to be here. When Dottie and Deb and Sheila asked me if I would do this and come and talk to you, not that night, but maybe the next night, I woke up at 2:30 in the morning and I had downloaded an entire speech in my head. And I thought, I better get up right now and write it down, because by morning, sometimes you say, oh, I'll remember, but it doesn't always happen. And so that was the first speech. And then over the course of the next few weeks, another speech came to me. And I realized that when I think about something, or I put out a desire for something, on some level it exists, it happens, it's already out there, and then it's just a question of energetically becoming a match for what I've asked for. So this afternoon, a third speech came to me. And I stood in front of the stove so I could time it. And I gave the speech. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about. And I will touch on what Dottie said I was going to talk about. That was 2 speeches ago. So I'm going to talk about life as a noetic experience. My life as a noetic experience. And I think I grew up in a middle-class household, and I didn't know I was middle class, or probably I was upper middle class. Because I was the only Jewish family in an all-Catholic neighborhood, and I went to Rose City Park Grade School and lived on Alameda, Northeast 49th and Alameda in Portland. And my father was in the furniture business and had a store called Cohn Brothers Furniture, which had been there 80 years. And I think it was when I entered high school, within the first few days of starting at Grant High School, I was 4'11", but my voice was the same as it is now. And the speech and debate teacher heard me talking in the hall and took me aside and said, "You're going to be taking speech, aren't you?" So she made sure, and I was on then for 4 years on I was on the debate team, and she entered me in all kinds of contests. And I think the judges, when this little tiny person stood up and a voice, comes out, a resonant voice like this comes out, they don't care what you're saying. They give you the prize. So I won a lot of things. And then I went on to Stanford University and was on the debate team there as well. Probably my first noetic experience was as a sophomore in high school. I was 16 years old, and my sophomore English teacher said, "Tonight, I want you to go home and I want you to write a poem." And I had never written a poem in my life. And so I sat down when I got home And what I wrote was, the eastern rise of time on newborn wings bursts out across the lifeless crowd and sings its climb to heights unknown of beauty, warmth, and power upon its throne, to fade again in western sky and only for a moment lie before it takes its course again to breathe once more in heart of man. I got an A.
Wow.
Where that came from, I don't know, but it came through me. And then the teacher said, over the weekend, I want you to write a Shakespearean love sonnet. Now, I had not even been on a date yet. So and it was snowing that weekend in Portland. And so I wrote the following. The dust from heaven's gate through chilly air comes floating down on wings of cloud and sky to answer once again the season's prayer when on the earth the leaves of autumn lie. And then when songs of spring end winter's stay and flowers bud beside the bubbling stream, as though there is some call they must obey which lies within the season's heart supreme, I think of all the love that I have had, of all the love and life that I have known, which now must melt in snowdrop tears so sad and wash itself across the weeping ground. When fall the drifting flakes and pass of time, 'tis then I realize your love sublime. So I got another A. So both of these came through me, and over the course of the next 50 years, I wrote on napkins and scraps of paper, usually inspired by some young lady that I met or fell in love with or married, or many things that prompted me to write something. And then out of it came this book. So it's called Journey of Love. And what happened was so one of the noetic experiences that I have is coincidence, and I have it often. And so I was invited to a dinner party in Los Angeles, and it was at the home of an artist. And there were creative people around the table. And one of the people was a woman from New York who was a dancer, professional dancer, and she was describing what it's like to dance. And so as she was describing, I was moved to write, and I just wrote down something. And the artist asked me what I had written, and he said, would you read it? And so I read it. And what I had done is I had described what it was like to dance, but from a feeling standpoint, from the inner space that we all know exists. So I described it in the poem, and she started to cry, the dancer. And so the artist said, do you have any more poems? And I said, I've got shoeboxes of them. So he asked me to send 70 poems on love, and he said he would do 70 original paintings. So this painting is actually, it's like 8 feet long. And what I wrote, the poem was, your spirit flies like the wind, warms like the sun, and watches like the sky. How wise the earth, waiting for the moment to be touched. So he sent me these paintings, and I was blown away. I mean, I had no idea that something like this would ever happen. So then he said, well, we should both write an introduction for the book. So he sent in his introduction. It was so good. I thought, I can't write anything like that. It would be an embarrassment to try. It was that good. So what I did was I painted my introduction. And I had never painted before. And I had a brush in each hand, and it took 5 minutes. And when the painting was done, I just burst into tears. It was such a release of all of that pent up whatever that I'd been told all my life, that you should keep your day job and not paint. So my painting, so this was my painting.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Wow. 5 minutes.
And so my introduction that I wrote is, creativity moved through me with a life of its own. My brush moved from hand to hand, from palette to canvas, in a dance of color bathed in blue. Emotions welled, longing for release. Time stopped, minutes seemed like hours. How long they had waited. Years of judgment vanished like mist. When the brush stopped, tears became the creative flow.
Could you pass that around so we could see that?
Absolutely. So my noetic experiences started happening with more regularity. By age 25, I met a young lady who was the daughter of a prominent screenwriter in Hollywood. His name was Sterling Silliphant, and he had written In the Heat of the Night, Charlie, The Poseidon Adventure, Towering Inferno, Route 66, Naked City, and he was very close with Bruce Lee and Carlos Castaneda, and he was preparing a screenplay for Bruce Lee, and Sterling had a padded room in his home, probably equivalent to where you were sitting right there, if that were a wall, and this was all padded. And so I was at the house, and Sterling had his workout with Bruce Lee, and Bruce said to me, I'd like you to come in, and I want you to kneel on the floor, and I'm going to put a catcher's mitt on your hand, and I'm going to kick you, and you won't get hurt because the room is all padded. So I'm kneeling on the floor, and I would say Bruce was, if I'm the table, Bruce was where Amy is sitting right over there, or Amy, yes, where you're sitting. Bruce was standing, and he said, "Are you ready?" And I said, "Yes." And the next thing I knew, I flew across the room and hit the wall, and I looked, and Amy was still there. Wow. Bruce was standing right where he had been before, and I wasn't conscious enough to understand what had just happened. And over the years, I think what had happened is that he moved me with his chi or his energy, because I never saw a kick, and I don't think the man moved. So then we sat down to lunch, and I was sitting next to him, and he had a coffee cup in front of him, empty cup, and he said, "For me, life is like a cup that fills from within." Now, I had no clue what he was talking about, because I hadn't yet awakened enough to even understand. So I thanked him and said, "That's very nice." But then, how many of you have ever been to a psychic or a fortune teller, or listened to Esther Hicks or Abraham or Ramtha? If you'd like to see a show of hands. Okay, I feel safe. So, let me preface it by saying that in June, roughly, of 1982, I met a young lady named Cynthia Black, whom I would marry 4 years later. And she had read a lot of material that probably all of you have read. She was light years, it seemed, ahead of me. And I thought, if I'm going to be in a relationship with this person, I need to read everything she's read and do everything she's done so that I can catch up. So I did. It took me about 3 months, and then she had me take a class called Money and You. And then I was invited to an accelerated learning business school called the Birkeland Business School, which was held up near Lake Tahoe. And the school taught me that we all have expanded consciousness within us. We have the ability to do things way beyond what we believe we can do. And all we have to do is get out of the way of ourselves, step out of the comfort zone, and allow that poem or that creative painting to come through. It's all there. It's there for all of us all the time. So in the course of this business school, it was a 30-day school, and you went from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. Mm-hmm. Every hour, you had a 10-minute break where you drank water and you ate an orange or a grapefruit or something sweet, and you never got tired. You just kept going. Buckminster Fuller was one of the teachers. So one evening, I was an Eagle Scout at 13, and so they knew I could make a fire in a fireplace. So they asked me he wanted a fire. So I went to his condo and I made a fire for him in his fireplace. And then he wanted vanilla ice cream with chocolate sauce. We had no chocolate sauce. So I went out and we bought Hershey bars and melted them and came back to the condo and poured them over his ice cream. And then we sat, Cynthia and I just sat at the table with Bucky Fuller. And he proceeded to recite Ogden Nash from memory. He loved Ogden Nash. And something prompted me, an intuitive thought hit me, ask Bucky Fuller if he could live life over again, what would he do differently, if anything? And he immediately answered, and he said, what I would do is I would write plays, because I know that by writing plays, I can have greater impact on humanity than I can by the things that I have created or the talks I give. And it was very fascinating to hear. So my question about psychics and fortune tellers and channeled entities and so on, at the end of that summer class, there was a 1-month class and ended in July. One of the directors of the program handed me a cassette to listen to, and it was Ramtha, and it was pretty weird, I thought at first, but he said, the person that gave it to me said, there's a gathering of 20 people in September in Albuquerque, and if you want to go, Ramtha will grant you any wish that you have, and it will happen. So I thought, oh, that sounds great. So then I came back to Portland, and I thought, what do you ask for if you can ask for anything and know it'll happen? So I had a friend who was a fortune teller in Portland. His name was Michael Thompson. And so I went to Michael Thompson and I said, Michael, if I could ask for anything and have it happen, and if you were me, what would you ask for? And Michael said, I would ask for God to work through me for the benefit of mankind. Wow. I thought, that's unnoble. I can ask that. It won't seem like I'm asking for the moon, and I'll be appreciated just fine. That's what I'll do. I'll ask that. So the first person to my left, sitting where Rich is, Ramtha said, what say you, entity? And the young man said, the IRS is calling me every day, and I owe them a lot of money, and I can't pay it, and they're driving me crazy, and they're threatening to garnish my wages. And Ramtha said, you don't have to say more. You'd like them to go away, wouldn't you? And he said, yes. That was it. And he said, so be it. The IRS never called the young men again.
Wow.
The next person was Cynthia. And Cynthia said, I own a piece of property on Maui. It's surrounded by other property. There's no entrance and there's no ingress or egress. There's no utilities. I've tried to sell it for 2 years and I haven't had a single offer. Marantha said, okay. That night she got one offer, and the next day she got a second offer, which she accepted and sold it. Now it's my turn. So Marantha says, what say you, entity? I said, I would like God to work through me for the benefit of mankind. And Marantha said, but you are God. And I thought, nobody's ever told me that. And I thought, if he's saying it, it must be true. So I said, yes, I understand. And he burst out laughing because he knew I didn't have a clue. So he said, entity, I'm going to send you on many adventures so you can learn what mankind needs to know. Then you can teach. And I'm going to teach you how to ride the wind, and you won't be afraid you'll fall off. And I said, okay, but stay close, please. So that was September of 82. In January of 83, I had been invited by J.Z. Knight to sit just one-on-one with Ramtha. And so I was sitting, if you're Ramtha, I was sitting with you. And Ramtha said to me, you're going to have the greatest publishing company in the history of mankind for spiritual books. You're going to make lots of money. Does that please you? And I thought, publishing was like 101 on my top 100 things to do in life. So I said, if I could do something and make a difference in people's lives by doing it, I would do it. I have a roof over my head. I have food on the table, but I would not do it just to make money. And he said, that's a precise teaching. It's one my daughter needs to learn. When you do something for money, you'll get it, but it won't stay. It'll go away. But when you do it for a purpose, something that has a positive outcome for people, you become a magnet and the money can't stay away. So, I thanked him. Again, didn't quite know what to do with this. And over the course of the next few months, I kind of forgot about what he had said. In August of that year, I was living in Hawaii at the time. In August, I got a phone call, and it was from a National Geographic photographer named Ricky Cook. And I didn't know him, but he said he had been taking a morning meditative walk that morning at 6 a.m. and he heard a voice on the street, and there was nobody there. He said it was like a loudspeaker. And the voice said, call Richard Cohn and ask how he can help you publish your book. So imagine, everyone in the room, if you get a phone call and somebody says something like that to you, what do you do and what do you think? At first I thought, this guy might be crazy because I don't, I'm not a publisher. I don't know anything about it. But then I thought, I've heard stories of people who've gotten messages from God and kind of pushed it aside, and like sitting on a building in a flood and the water's rising and they refuse the boats that come to pick them up. And I thought, I don't want to be that person. So I said, okay, I'm here. If you want to bring your photos over and show me, I'm happy to look. So he brought them over, and they were really amazing, amazing photos, but I didn't know what to do with them. So I said, why don't you find a real publisher and come back? I have some experience in business, and we could maybe form a partnership or something to help you do your book. So 2 weeks later, he came back with a real publisher, an actual publisher. And that publisher had another book project that he brought to our little group. And we formed a partnership called Beyond Words. And we had these two books. Well, the other book was a little further along, and that wound up becoming our first book. Those two books, and my job was to raise the money to do them. So I want you all to remember $2 million, because that's what I raised, and that's what I signed for personally. That will be meaningful later when I try to pay it back. So those two books became the most award-winning photo books that had ever been done. They won over 30 international awards. The Printing Industries of America awards one book in the world each year as the finest printed book, and the first book we did won that. The New York Art Directors Show awards, like the Academy Awards, it selects one book. It won that first book won Best Photography of the Year and Best Design of the Year. Those books also were done in multiple levels. They were done as regular hardcover books, like the coffee table book here. They were done in a slip-cased version. The book slides into a slipcase, and it was signed by the photographer. And they were done in a hand-bound limited edition with handmade paper, the binder in Niger goatskin from England, and the binder was trained in the Vatican in the rare book section. And so just beautiful, fine books as fine art. So in 1983, as we're planning these books, and early 84, before they've come out, we had some printed sheets from the book. And my publishing partner was named Bob Goodman, and we talked about how he would go to New York and see if he could find a distributor, maybe find a big publisher who'd be willing to take these books on. So he goes back to New York, and he doesn't find anybody. And he's sitting in the lunchroom of one of the publishing houses, and there's one other man sitting there having lunch too. And so they start chatting, and it turns out this man is a sales rep for that publishing company. And so Bob asked him, he said, if you had beautiful books that looked like these printed pages, who would you talk to? And he said, I would talk to Harry Hoffman. He's just retired from Walden Books as the CEO, and he'll know what to do. They have stores all over the United States. So Bob came back to Hawaii, and we sat down together, and we thought, okay, what are we going to say to Harry Hoffman, and how do we do this? And so we wrote out a little script, and Bob was going to say it and call. So we got the number for Walden, and Bob calls Walden, and Harry Hoffman answers the phone. So another Noetic experience, coincidence at a level that doesn't usually happen. There was no secretary, there was no guard dog at the door. There just was Harry Hoffman. And so Bob gave his little pitch, and Harry said, well, why don't you send me what these books look like, and if they're as nice as you describe, I will arrange a meeting for you in the next few weeks, and I'll have all the executives of Walden, and you fly back and do a presentation for us. So we did send it off. Harry arranged the meeting. Bob flew back. The meeting happens. Bob does his presentation, and Harry says, I would like to order 20,000 copies of each book, and I want you to do 2 books a year, new books a year for the next 10 years. Wow. So to me, that was like manna from heaven. So we opened a bottle of champagne when Bob got back and celebrated, and then Bob shared with us that actually, even though Harry had ordered 20,000 of each, he told Harry, don't take 20,000, just take 10,000 of each. Give us a purchase order for 10,000 each, and we'll keep the other 10,000 for you in our warehouse. So when you're ready, we'll ship them to you. Now, anyone who's ever sold anything in their life knows not to turn down an order, particularly when you have that product. So then Bob told the printer, our printer, Dynagraphics in Portland, Bob told the printer, we have an order for 20,000 of each. And in fact, we should probably print 40,000 of one of the books, the first one, because they're probably they'll go through those 20 and need more. So you all can guess what happened. Walden took the 10,000 and never took any more of each. And so we had 30 more thousand of one book and 10,000 of the other book. Ouch. And had to learn how to sell them. And so my father loaned us his station wagon, and we loaded books, and we started driving south, and we stopped in every town that we could. In those days, there were phone books, and we would stop we'd find a telephone stand. We'd look up bookstores in the town and call them and go in. And the very first one we went into said, "These are beautiful. I'll take 2 of each, and here's a check." And we thought, wow, this works. We can actually get paid to sell them. We thought you have to bill them and get paid 30 days later or something. Well, from that point on, we asked for a check with every single one. And we had books shipped to different places along the way. We kept selling out of everything out of the station wagon. We finally got down to Santa Monica. We were in a small store, and the owner of the store said, "You guys are publishers. This is crazy for you to be out selling them door to door. There's a book rep here in this store right now who is from St. Martin's Press in New York. Let me show them to him." And as coincidence and serendipity would happen, this man's wife was a yoga instructress in Santa Monica. He was very conscious. He looked at these books. He said, "These are amazing. I will get the entire St. Martin's rep system to sell your books." Mm-hmm. So he got them into Sam's Club. It's like a Costco or Walmart type. And he got them all over the place. And we sold a lot of them. And the books were $49.95 retail. Wow. So he said, what are you going to be doing next year? Because we'll need more books. We'll need new titles to go out. We thought, well, can't we just keep selling these books? He said, that's not how it works in the book industry. You have to do something new. Well, we didn't have anything new. So Graphic Arts Publishing, which doesn't exist in Portland anymore, but did exist on Northwest Eon, took it on. And they said, let's raise the price to $60 because these books are worth much more than $49.95. Today on Amazon, you see books go down in price. They don't go up in price, but in that year, they did. And so for 1 year, Graphic Arts sold them. And then we were introduced to a distributor called Publishers Group West in the Berkeley area of California. And they loved the books. And they said, we would like you to raise the price to $75 because that's what they're worth. And then they sold them. And we were with Publishers Group West from that point on for 19 years. In 1987, we did our first self-help book. And that book was called Seeing Without Glasses. And the eye doctor, Dr. Robert Michael Kaplan, was a professor at University of Pacific in Forest Grove. And what he had found in working with patients was that if a patient could remember when they first needed glasses, and he would talk with them, and they would go back, and maybe, let's say they were 5 years old, and he would say, and what was happening in your life at that point? And they'd say, well, my father came home last week, and he said, we're going to be moving to another city, and you're going to get to have your own bedroom, and you'll get to meet all new friends. And what happened for that little 5-year-old, of course, was that life that had been wonderful all of a sudden was not looking so wonderful. So what Dr. Kaplan found was that in this case, this person could see close up, but couldn't see far away. So the future looked dim, but the present looked good. And what he then would do with the patient is help them reframe the cellular memory in their body to re-experience it in a new way, in a different way. And I said reframe, not for glasses, but that's, he did this. And I got to witness it. He let me sit in with a patient one day, and it was fascinating to see. What was happening simultaneously was that we now had, you remember the limited editions, these hand-bound limited editions that we had. We had a sales rep in New York, or in Virginia, I should say, and that rep had the books, the limited editions, on his coffee table in his home. And on a Friday, he had gone to pick up his son at the daycare at a little school, like a Montessori school. And the son had a pet rabbit. He said, "Dad, we have to take this rabbit home for the weekend to take care of it because Julie, who owns the rabbit, is going to be coming on Sunday night to pick it up, to take it back to her house." And so he takes the rabbit home, and Julie comes Sunday night, and she walks in and she gets the rabbit, and then she looks and she sees these 2 beautiful books. And she said, "You don't know this about me, but I'm the book buyer for the White House Presidential Gifts of State."
Oh my God.
And President Reagan is going to be going to Japan to meet the Emperor of Japan. And this book here is called Within a Rainbowed Sea. Emperor Hirohito was an amateur marine biologist, and I think this would be the perfect gift for him to take. So our sales rep called me, and so then the young lady she was the State Department, as it turns out, buys the gift for the president to take. So she worked in the State Department, and so she said, the emperor is 80 years old, it's his birthday, but it's also the 60th anniversary of his reign. And we're looking up to see which number limited to give him, number 60 or number 80. I don't remember at this moment which one was meant bad luck in Japanese. Is it kanji in their numbers? One of those 2 numbers wasn't such a good number, but the other one was very good. So he got the other one. And what the president wrote in the book was, "May the seas between us never divide us." And he and Nancy Reagan passed the book to Emperor and Mrs. Hirohito. We planted trees for every book that was sold and we planted them on the island of Molokai. And so the emperor sent in his little form, and a tree was planted in his name. In 1988, we published our first children's book. It was called Davy's Dream. And Davy's Dream is about a little boy who loves orca whales. And he has his little sailboat, and he goes out into the Puget Sound area and hopes that orcas will come and play with him. But none of them come around him. And he goes back and he takes a nap on the grassy knoll and has a dream. And in the dream, he sees that if he paints the bottom of his boat to look like an orca whale and then goes out, the orcas will come around and play with him. So the next week he's painted it, he goes out, And sure enough, that's exactly what happens. And it's late in the afternoon, and he's watching the orca, is not paying attention. He runs right into a rock and puts a hole in his boat. The orcas then come and buoy up his boat and guide him in, take him into shore, as they would if one of their own was injured. They would keep the orca up so it could breathe. So he gets into shore. He tells the fishermen, "You'll never believe what happened." And they said, "You've been out in the sun too long, son. This doesn't, this doesn't happen." So what the last page in the book said is that and I know that dreams pursued can come true. And so the author would go to schools and do a presentation and show slides about how this was his first book and how he wrote it. And then he would encourage kids to write their own stories. And he would send us piles of checks that parents would buy the book. And it really helped cash flow greatly, because when you're publishing primarily coffee table books, you sell them in the fall and winter. You don't sell so many during the rest of the year. So that began my publishing journey. And what happened was Bob Goodman fell in love and took off, maybe 1 year after we started publishing. And so I had to learn how to be a publisher, and what to do. And I'm still learning to this day. My motto is I never learn less. So there's always something I can learn. I've made some notes here of the other two speeches too. So in 1990, we published this book. This is called Wisdom Keepers. This was the first coffee table book ever done on recycled paper and soy ink. And it took 10 years for the photographer and writer to be trusted enough by the Native American. There's 18 elders and clan mothers in the book. And the wisdom in this book was not shared outside of the Indian nations normally. And I felt a tremendous fiduciary responsibility to do this book in a way that would honor the Native people. On the back of the book, you see a little girl, and she's holding the doll with no face. And the pattern that goes as a wampum belt on which the history of their nations is told. This is Leon Shenandoah. He was the elder of the 5 Indian nations in New York area, Shinnecock, and I can't remember all their names in this moment. And the elder, the chief, is chosen by the women. The women choose the chief. And if he screws up, he's out of there. They choose a new chief. So when this book was printed, again printed at Dynagraphics in Portland, I had to do, or someone had to do, a press check every 4 hours, and I had the midnight and 4 a.m. shift. And so at 3 a.m, I was in their lunchroom asleep on a couch, and I woke up and I looked, and in front of me was a Native American elder. It was Frank Fool's Crow, who was the chief of the Lakota Indian Nation, and he'd made his transition 5 years earlier, but he was there right in front of me. And there were 2 other very large Native Americans standing behind him. I did not recognize them, but Frank came, stood in front of me, and then just passed through the wall. The other 2 came, looked at me, and passed through the wall. So you can imagine it was very hard to go back to sleep. I was wide awake on a level I've never been before. And I had to go down and do my press check. And, how do you tell these guys on the printing press what just happened? Because they would think I was absolutely out of my mind. So I didn't say a word. And a few weeks later, I was in New York. The chief of the Mohawk Indian Nation, who's in here, was being presented an award, and I'd been invited to be there with him. He was seated on my left, and Robert Kennedy Jr. was on my right, and I'm describing what transpired that night. And the Mohawk elders said, what you experienced sometimes happens on a vision quest, where in our belief system, the past and the future are equipresent. There's no differentiation. Time doesn't exist. It's irrelevant. And he said they were probably there to show you couldn't possibly screw up the printing. They would be on press with you. So when the last chapter in the book was ready to print, our book designer, a man named Robin Rickabaugh here in Portland, looked at in those days, you laid out the book on big boards and you put little squares where the pictures would go, and you sent the film over to the color separator. They sent back 4 layers of film to go in those places. And so he looked at it, and everything had been rearranged. And he said, what is going on here? And the color separator said, we didn't do anything. This is how it came to us. He said, no, I have a copy of what was sent to you. And he looked at it and he said, you know what? It's better. It looks better than what I sent to you. So let's go with it. Again, these people who were here, they were supervising the design as well. And my father had passed away in 1989, and this book was published in 1990, the same week that Dances with Wolves came out. So another, if we don't believe in coincidence and serendipity yet, there's more to come. So my father had Michael Thompson, the fortune teller that told me I could ask for God to work through me for the benefit of mankind, told me that my father was going to help my publishing company from the other side, and that he would send a sign so that I would know that it was from him. So I went to the Frankfurt Book Fair in 1990 for the first time. All the publishers of the world gather there, and you have a booth, and you sell licensing of your book into other languages. And I was invited to 1,000-person sit-down dinner, and everybody was assigned a table, and you had a little name tag where you're supposed to sit. And I go to my table, and it's my father's name. Not mine. So that was a sign. And I got a phone call from a psychic in Arizona, and she said, I bought a copy of Wisdom Keepers, and I had it on my lap, and I closed my eyes, was out on my porch, and I closed my eyes, I'm just meditating on the book, it's so beautiful. And she said, I opened my eyes, and there was a red-tailed hawk sitting on the railing looking at me. And she closed her eyes again, and what she saw was that hawk picking up the book and going to all the cities around the United States, and wherever it would go down and land, people would buy it. And then it started flying to other places around the world. So what happened then was that we sold 200,000 copies of this book, a $40 retail hardcover, and then it was done in paperback and continued to sell even more. It was licensed in Germany. They sold about 30,000 copies in Germany alone. So at this point in 1990, it's now been about 7 years since I raised $2 million. And Bob figured out how to spend it, obviously, because he printed lots more than what we needed at the time. So I began to get phone calls from lots of different people, which I answered. And I would get letters in the mail. If it had 3 names in the return address, I didn't open those because I knew those were from lawyers. And over the course of the next, until 2003, we still owed that level of money. And I did a vision board. How many of you have ever done a vision board?
Yeah.
Okay. We even do it at our company. All the employees, we sit down and spread these big boards out and cut out pictures and words. And so we do a collective vision board. So I did a vision board and I put on it, where to find $1 million you never knew you had. So in 2004, the January of 2004, I did this. And in March of 2004, we were publishing Dr. Emoto, this little book, Hidden Messages in Water. And I went to see this movie, What the Bleep Do We Know, at the Baghdad Theater on Belmont Street. And at a certain point in the movie, up come 4 pictures from this book that Dr. Emoto had given permission for, but had never told us. And I let out a yell in the theater because I was so excited. And we had Dr. Emoto coming to Portland to give a talk. And we had maybe 100 people scheduled to come hear him. So my wife and I figured out we could stand outside the Baghdad Theater and hand out flyers, which we did. And so we just handed a flyer and said, "The Water Crystal Man is coming to Portland. The Water Crystal Man is coming to Portland." And we had 800 people show up at the Multnomah Athletic Club to hear him, and they had to pipe it into 2 rooms. So when this book came out, we didn't have a lot of money, obviously, because we were paying people, and we had enough money to print 5,000 copies. And so one day, another coincidence happens. I get a phone call from Paramount Pictures, and it's a woman who wants the address of Muhammad Ali's daughter, whom we had published her, and I gave it to her. And she said, "I wear another hat too. I'm a psychic, and I have a message for you if you want to hear it." So I've been listening to messages for quite a while now, so I thought, okay. And she said, "You've published a little book called The Hidden Messages in Water. The orders are going to come in for this at a rate that you cannot sustain. You need to get private financing or bank financing." And bank financing was not an option because we had very little in the way of assets, but a lot in the way of debt. Private financing might be a different case. So we were able to get private financing, and we paid 25 cents per book as a profit, and we paid back the cost of the printing each time. Well, it wasn't long before we were up to 50,000 copies printing at a time. And at that point, we now actually had the money to print them. The private financer said, "It's fine. You don't have to pay me anymore. And thank you." And we paid off the loan. So then what happened is it went on the New York Times bestseller list. And we had a second book called The True Power of Water, and it came out, and it also went on the New York Times bestseller list. Before 9/11 happened, we had published another little book called When God Winks. Now, this is a book about coincidence and serendipity in our lives and how there are no mistakes. Oprah gave a tour of her new apartment in Chicago and went into the guest bedroom and picked up a book that she loved for her guests to read. It was this one. And she said, all she said was, "I'd love for my guests to read this book. It shows there are no mistakes." 80,000 copies sold that week just from that one mention. Borders Books in New York, or in Ann Arbor, Michigan, was having a presentation from Simon & Schuster. Judith Kerr was the publisher of one of their divisions, and she was talking about a book that she was doing on coincidence and serendipity and how there are no mistakes. And the religion buyer at Borders raised her hand and said, "Miss Kerr, there's a book that we can't keep in stock. It's called When God Winks. It's by a small publisher in Oregon, and it's about the same subject. You should get a copy and look at it. Maybe you can buy it from them." And so she, being smart, she bought one, read it on the plane, going back, called me Monday morning, and made us a 6-figure offer to buy this book from us. And it isn't buying the book outright, it's giving an advance against future earnings of the book. So once the book earned out those 6 figures, there would be more money coming in the way of royalties to be shared with the author. So since we needed $2 million, we took those 6 figures and were able to start paying down a lot of debt. So when this book hit the New York Times, I thought I should go talk to Judith Kerr, because she bought one book from us, maybe she'd buy another. And so I brought her True Power of Water and this book, and I went to the American Booksellers Convention in New York, made an appointment to see her. She had like 10 people standing around waiting to talk to her. I walked up and I said, "Judith, I'm Richard Cohn from Beyond Words Publishing. Our book, Hidden Messages in Water, just hit the New York Times list, and True Power of Water is going to be on the list as well." And she said, "I'm so happy for you. That is wonderful." And then turned and talked to the other people. So this is where divine intervention came in, because I did all I could, I guess. And so then that night, Judith has an agent arriving from Ireland who's going to be staying at her home. And the agent comes in and she said, "You know, Judith, I read the most interesting little book on the airplane. It's by a small publisher in Oregon. It's called Hidden Messages in Water." And Judith said, I've heard of that, I think. And so then the next day, the book fair is over and Judith is having her Monday morning editorial meeting. And one of her editors comes up to her and says, "Over the weekend, I read this little book called Hidden Messages in Water." So then the light bulb went off. So Judith goes across the street to Barnes & Noble, and she said, "Do you have Hidden Messages in Water?" And they said, "Well, we have 2 copies left." She said, "I'll take them both." As she goes to pay for them at the counter, the clerk says, "Oh, this is a wonderful book. It's in the movie What the Bleep Do We Know?" And she said, "There's a movie?" She calls our office. Now, I'm still in New York at that point, so she calls Portland. And my wife takes the call, and Judith said, "I'm interested in making an offer for the Hidden Messages in Water. And is Richard there?" And my wife said, "No, he's still in New York. He'll be back tomorrow. But it's interesting that you're calling, because another publisher just called and wanted to make an offer to buy them." And she said, whatever you do, do not sell them to anybody else. I want to make a preemptive offer, and I want to take all the other offers off the table. So she called the next day and made a 7-figure offer to buy this book and the other book and a third Dr. Moto book. And that gave us enough money to pay back everybody that we owed. So when I woke up, when I did that vision board in January and where to find $1 million you never knew you had, this book produced it, and then some. And the other interesting thing that happened along the way, and if when I tell you this, this doesn't happen normally in business. Our landlord came to us in January and he said, I don't want you to pay us any money for a year. And he said, I just talked to your bank and I've asked them not to pay you any money. I've asked I've told the bank that I don't want Beyond Words to pay any money for 1 year to the bank. And at the end of 1 year, I want you to use all of that money during the year to print more books and sell more books so that then you can pay us both off and you'll be in a profit position. But if you don't pay us, we're going to put you into bankruptcy. So at the end, like in October, November, I'm thinking, life's not going to be so good because we're not going to be able to pay. We've done okay, but we haven't gotten enough. Another publisher from Oklahoma calls me and she said, I've been looking at your list of books. I have picked out a whole series of your books. I want to print our own edition of each of those. And I'm going to pay you an advance of $6,000 per book. And then after 5 years, we'll pay you more. And guess how much we owed the bank and the landlord? Exactly 6 times. She picked out 24 books at $6,000 each. It was $144,000. And that was exactly what we owed.
Wow.
So these things are all unusual, but they all happen. They're all real. And I've been asked how the secret came to us, because this book, in July 1st of 2006, we became a partner with Simon & Schuster in New York. And the first book we brought them was this book. What had happened a few months before, we were negotiating an agreement with Simon & Schuster. And if any of you are familiar with Esther Hicks, who knows Abraham, Esther and her husband, her late husband, Jerry, were at our home for dinner. And we were sitting after dinner out on the patio. And Esther said, I've never had this happen to me before, but your dog wants to come through me right now. He has a message. So my dog was an old English sheepdog who sat at our office every day for 13 years in the entrance, so that you had to step over him to get into the building so he could check out anyone who came in. And our dog said, the deal with Simon Schuster is a good deal for you. And then he said, you know what? This is too big of a deal for me to tell you. I need to bring in the horses. So Esther said, now I'm channeling 6 horses. They're in a circle. Your dog is running around the circle. And the horses said, sign the deal. Do not hesitate. We signed it the next day. We brought this book to Simon Schuster. The first printing was 100,000 copies. The first reprint was 2 million copies.
Wow.
That cost over $6 million just to reprint. Our company wasn't worth $1 million. So, I mean, there would have been no way that we could have ever done that. It's now in 57 languages worldwide, sold 30 million copies worldwide. And when we talk about consciousness in publishing and what's happening in today's world, this book today is selling more copies than it did 4 years ago. So the numbers this year are higher than 2015, 16, 17, or 18. And what occurs to me, because I don't know this to be a fact, but what is very possible is that young people who were 10 years old or 12 years old in 2006, 2007, now they're in their early 20s and they're wanting to learn, they're wanting to discover, they're exploring spirituality, and they're buying this book because it is what's called an evergreen. It has not gone out of style or fashion, and it's still selling, and it's now selling about 8,000 copies a month, just this book. And then she has 2 other books, The Power and the Magic, and the Gratitude Journal, and the audio and the ebook. And something else about consciousness in publishing is that when the ebooks started coming out, a lot of people thought this is going to be a dinosaur. It's a thing of the past because people will get the Kindle and the Nook and whatever, and that's how they're going to read their material. That is true in kiss and tell novels, in the kinds of things that you read once and move on. But for material that is scientific material or personal growth material, ebooks represent about 15% of our sales. So 85% of our sales are hardcover of this book. The same is true, any of the self-help personal growth books, For Agreements, any of them, it's that. That's what's happened. And ebooks, when all these devices came out, Amazon and Barnes & Noble bought lots of ebooks and loaded them onto the device so that when you bought the device, you got a lot of free ebooks to read. Then, about 3 years ago, ebook sales plateaued, and now they're actually going down. So people do appreciate books. IONS, being on the board of IONS is a fascinating experience because it is an organic organization. It's not structured in the way of most organizations, and yet it does have structure. I was talking with Claire LaChance, who's the CEO of IONS, and when she was brought in, she was a Harvard MBA. She's not a scientist, had been a consultant to business, and she brought in a level of fiscal responsibility. She made sure that there was accountability within the staff and what they were doing. She brought financial responsibility in so that the monies that were generated at IONS could help sustain IONS each year, and they weren't operating at a deficit. She brought also a freedom to look at what we were doing at IONS and decide what can we do better. And at IONS right now, have any of you stayed on the campus there?
I have.
Yeah, okay. Some of the buildings where people stay and when they go to workshops there, some of the buildings are older buildings, and they're functional. You can sleep and the toilets do flush, but they're not. It's not like Hyatt or something like that. And so one of the things that we've talked about is to build some new facilities so that people who come to the campus can have a good experience staying there. But the land is so special. It's 196 acres, and it's rolling hills. It's in Petaluma, so it's in Marin County, and it's all covered with oak trees. And IONS owns that. They own that land. It's all paid for. And it borders a national park, and it's a Native American tribe, an Indian nation, that the name of which, I want to pronounce it correctly, the Grateful Dead had a house there on what is the national park now, in the 70s. It's the Olampali indigenous land, and the 190, I think I said 196, it's 194 acres borders that land. So the land is very spiritual. When you go there, you're going at the invitation of the land, and you feel it. You whether you took a course or did anything other than just go there, you will. It's an experience, because you will feel it. And so now what the organization is doing, what the board is working on, is that there's a 5-year plan, which 1 year has already happened. So 4 more years will bring us to the 50th anniversary of Edgar Mitchell's Walking on the Moon. And it's the 50th anniversary of IONS. And when he was in the capsule coming back, he had the window seat. Now, a number of astronauts had said to the other astronauts who went up with him, why would you want to go up with, he was called a gearhead, because he was the smartest of all the astronauts. Brilliant. And they said, why would you want to go up with a guy like that? And they said, we don't care about going up with somebody like that. We want him to bring us back, because if something happens, he'll know what to do. So as he's sitting in the window seat, that capsule is rotating, and he sees the Earth, and he sees the sun, and he sees the cosmos, and he sees the moon, and he recognizes, he has an epiphany. It just struck him that it's all interconnected. It's all related. We're all one. And when he got back, he was so profoundly changed from that experience. He went to New York. And the reason I know this is that Jean Houston wrote the foreword to my book. And I was talking with Jean, and she said that Edgar came to New York and asked her advice on what to do. And she confirmed to him that you should set up an organization, an institute, a not-for-profit, to study inner space. You've studied outer space. There was no mistake that you were the person that went there, and there's no mistake now that you're going to get to do this. You first loved flying. You became a military officer. You became an astronaut. You did everything just right. And the universe put you in that place so that you could have that experience, that you could come back and do now what you need to do for humanity. So what IONS is doing now, not only to build new facilities, but to build the science facilities that will allow the scientists to do work at a whole another level. There is one thing going on right now, which is a study on healing. And they have 175 patients, all of whom have carpal tunnel. And they have 17 healers. And this is all done scientifically. I'm not a scientist. I've listened, I've read the material, and I know that this is meticulously done, even to the water that they all drink the same special water. It's just everything is documented to make sure that this can be published. And if the results come out the way that it looks like they will, this will be transformational in terms of pain management and actual physical healing of something that would have otherwise required surgery, and in this case won't. And the early results indicate that it's going in that direction. When I was on Valentine's Day 11 years ago, 2008, I had prostate cancer surgery in Los Angeles. And it was on a Thursday, and after the surgery, I was black and blue over 3/4 of my body. One of our authors was an MD in Baltimore, Maryland, and worked at Johns Hopkins. And his name was Dr. Rick Levy, and he'd written this book, Miraculous Health. And he said, I'm going to send you distance healing tomorrow and over the weekend so that you can see if it helps you with your healing. I wasn't aware, I didn't know what distance healing was, but if he was willing to help me, I was open. So by Sunday night, I was not black and blue anymore. And the surgeon had told me I'd be black and blue for 2 to 3 weeks. So on Monday, I went in for my appointment with the surgeon, and he said, wow, I did a really good job. I tried to tell him a little bit about Dr. Levy, but he didn't want to hear that. I'd studied Reiki. I did 2 levels of Reiki. And so I thought if distance healing can work on me, maybe I can send distance healing. And so part of the class was we were to send distance healing to someone. And so I knew a woman in Redding, California. She said she had pain in her upper shoulders. It was like people were sticking needles in her shoulders. She had pain all the time. And so I said, I'm going to send you distance healing and call me when I'm done. And there's no charge, and we'll see if it works. So I pictured her about this big. And so I could rotate her, I could turn her over, I could do Reiki on her whole body, and then I could concentrate just on the shoulders. And she called me an hour after it was done, and she said, this is amazing. I don't know how to explain it, but there's no pain. It's gone completely. So I had kidney stones. And for any woman in the room who's given birth and not had a kidney stone, the kidney stone is as close as a man can get to giving birth. Because I have an employee who's done both. And so I just couldn't figure out what to do. And I went to a urologist, and they were going to prescribe pills. And then we published a book called Outstanding Health. And that's this author, Dr. Michael Gallitzer. So he was a emergency room doctor for 18 years. And then he realized there's got to be more to medicine than what I'm seeing. And so he studied naturopathic medicine, and he has all German equipment. So I went in to see him. Well, actually, I went in to see him because we were publishing his book. I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know that I was seeing him as an appointment, but that's what happened. So I think I might need a Kleenex here in a second.
Milk. My milk can bring one.
So he, thank you very much. Thank you. So what Dr. Gallitzer did was he hooked up an electrode to my finger, and then he took these little tiny bottles of I don't know really what they are, And he put them in different spots in this machine. And he said, you have, your kidneys are functioning at about 50%, your liver at 70%. And I had not told him that I had kidney stones. And he said, I want you to take these drops, and your adrenals are also a little weak. And so he gave me like 6 little vials to take, about that much each morning. But he gave it to me in the office right then. And this was like 2 o'clock. By 10 p.m. that night, I had peed 11 times. And it was just like I needed to be near a bathroom all the time. I couldn't figure out what was happening. That was 3 years ago. I've not had a kidney stone since. And it was all just related to the fact that they weren't working the way they're supposed to be working. And somehow these little drops work. So he's Suzanne Summers' doctor. He's Tony Robbins' doctor, who's now fallen into some disrepute. But he's a pretty amazing doctor. And this is like the Bible of books. It's just so full of information. So I want to close by really, I said that I was honored to be here, but I really want to honor each of you for being part of the IONS community group. On the board, we talk about community groups all the time because IONS can create the information. IONS can be an incubator of new information, of scientific breakthroughs, but it is community groups, people like you, who can help bring this information out to the world. And as a board member, I applaud you and really honor you. And if any of you are not members of IONS and want to be, you can go on noetic.org and join. If any of you ever want to make a contribution to IONS, it is money that will be well spent and very carefully curated. There's no fluff there. So thank you for allowing me to be here with you and to share my Noetic life. I hope that it gives you confirmation and affirmation that when the intuitive voice inside you says, who is getting their wrap up, that wanted going upstairs to get her wrap?
That was me.
Okay. And we talked about,
Yes.
so my intuitive voice it's so soft and so subtle, and it'll say, there's a parking place right in front if you go to the front. And my ego says, you'll never find a parking place in front. You should park right here, 2 blocks away. If I listen to my intuitive voice, it's always right. And it's taken me most of a lifetime to learn that. I trust it 100% now. So thank you very, very much for letting me be with you. It's, I think I got as much value as I hope you got.
We have time for a couple of questions.
Yes. Yes. Oh. Yes.
Could you repeat the question for the people who
Yes.
dialed in?
So the question was the HEAL documentary and what our part is in this. And if I had planted that question, it would have been the perfect question. Because when The Secret DVD came out, which I've given you all a copy of, and many of you probably already have it, so share it with a friend. It's yours to do with that way. When The Secret documentary came out, we sold about 100,000 downloads, and mostly downloads, but some physical DVDs. For HEAL, this came out a year ago. We've sold 80,000 rentals, 50,000 downloads, and 24,000 physical DVDs. And that is, those numbers are greater than what happened with The Secret. And so we talked to the author and said, we would, or to the filmmaker, Kelly Noonan Gores and Adam Schomer, and we said, you should do a book, because that's what happened with The Secret, was we did a book. And so they worked on it for over the year, and October 22nd, the book comes out. The book will have almost 3 times the content of the film. So it is really, if you transcribe the film, it's 17,000 words, and the book is 43,000 words. So it's really going to be special. And already we've sold 14 languages already, and it's not even published in English yet. So that has never happened in 36 years. Simon Schuster's never had that happen. And so we're...
When did you say you think that's going to be published?
It will be October 22nd is the physical publication date. We will actually have copies probably arriving in our warehouse September 23rd, roughly. And I brought a few little catalogs if anyone wants to know what we're doing, and we're sponsoring a cruise also.
Where are you going?
We're going to Alaska next year. Dr. Dean Radin is the keynote. We have Hollister Rand, who's a world-class medium, and she teaches as people come to her. I mean, if she were in this room, she would say a name of somebody in this room, and somebody's mother or aunt or sister or someone will come through, and always very healing. She works with John Edwards, and she was married to James von Prague, who's gay, but she didn't know he was gay when they got married because they were teenagers. And she's very special. Mark Gober is one of the other presenters. He wrote a book called The End of Upside Down Thinking, which is a very, very good book. He's on the IONS board. Danielle McKinnon is an animal communicator and psychic. So anyone that has questions about their companion animal, the animal will definitely come through and tell you. There are 4 other speakers, one of whom is J.D. Messenger. He's a man who was CEO of a big international accounting firm, Ernst & Young, and then he had an epiphany that happened, and so he gave up all that corporate stuff, and now he teaches all over the world. And there's a woman who is a healer. She heals with blinking of the eyes, and she's better than an MRI machine. She literally will look at you. She'll scan your body, and within 10 minutes she'll tell you if something's amiss or something.
What is her name?
Her name is
Kimberly Meredith? No.
How did you know that?
Okay. Well, because I was, someone asked if I might edit her book, and then it didn't happen, but we had conversations.
Interesting. Thank you. See, now that's a noetic experience.
Yes.
Is she doing any work in Israel? Because I met these 2 women from Israel
That
who
blink
were
the eyes.
studying. Yes, about the eyes.
Yes. So I had an experience with it was Aneta and Netta.
Yeah.
Aneta was the doctor, and Netta was. I had a. These are 2 women who were at the IONS conference. And one is an MD from Israel, and the other is a healer from Israel, and their specialty is skin cancer, melanoma.
Hmm.
And the healer studies the meridians of the body and where the emotions lodge cellularly and where the melanomas occur as a result. The MD has totally shifted her practice because she, used to freeze it, burn it, whatever, or cut it. And now I had a little spot or a scab on my arm. And I met them within 10 minutes of being at the conference. They were lost and I was lost. And so we were chatting, and when I found out what they did, I said, it's funny, I'm going to OHSU for my annual checkup. And they said, oh, why don't we check you up right now? so they had me, I took my shirt, rolled it up, and the MD looked at it. She said, probably nothing, but let me have the healer blink and look. And she put her hands over my arm and she said, it's nothing to worry about. It'll go away. And within 3 days, the scab that had been there for 2 months went away. But yes. So this will be an amazing piece. And then the cruise, it is Kimberly Meredith, who's the healer.
She was on the Alaska cruise that we did with Toddy Blackstone.
Okay.
I don't remember her blinking.
Yeah.
Calling in angels or something.
Yeah.
She does that too. She'll call in Mother Mary and angels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she now the blinking, if you meet her for the first time, it's distracting to,
Right.
but if you know that what's about to happen is going to be phenomenal, you get right past the blinking part. There's 3 other speakers, and they were just added, and they're not people that we had published, but they're coming through Waterside. Bill Gladstone is a literary agent. He's the agent for he's Kimberly's agent, and he's the agent for the Japanese woman that has you declutter your house.
Oh, Marie Kondo.
Marie Kondo. Yeah, he's Marie Kondo.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Richard. We really appreciate it. So now we do our unspeaking of these. We're going to pass our little stone around the opposite way, and for you to say your name and then whatever you'd like to say to be complete for the evening.
So I'm
Gonna
Richard
stop.
Cohn.